our defense budget has always been a high debating point among critics and commentators. And it has always been a customary drill year after year to put defense allocation under microscope and see whether India's military might, along with a large army of ex-servicemen, have been treated nicely or not. At least, that is the idea. And in the next half an hour, we'll try to see how much money the India's military establishment had got in the past and what are the projections in the future.
When we got our independence, defense was a completely low priority item, and within 1 year we realized that what a blunder we had made when we accosted the Pakistani tribals who came into Kashmir. We didn't learn our lesson then. It took us till 1962 to realize what a bigger blunder we had made by not bringing up the capabilities of our Indian armed forces. But after 65, some turnaround happened and acquisition started, and the government budgets and the military budget started rising. Historically speaking, I think the low point of our budget has been at about 1.6% of the GDP, and that must have been a very small sum of maybe 200 crores or 300 crores in some years ago, which I don't remember. Again, the peak level of funding for the defense sector has probably been 2.1%. And today we are at about 1.78, 1.8% of GDP.
These early setback in military terms shook us from inside out and forced us to rethink, to strengthen our armed forces. No longer, we as a nation could ill afford to lower our guard, militarily speaking. Reasonable defense budgetary allocations began soon after 1965 war, and it picked up after 1971 war victory against Pakistan, both East Pakistan, which became Bangladesh, and the remainder part of the Pakistan, the erstwhile West Pakistan, which was reduced to only being called simply Pakistan. The defense public sector units had come up. The government had already begun to acquire large pieces of armaments from foreign buyers, and India was slowly emerging as a major defense spender.
There are two things. One is the actual requirement. So you have to really work out your requirement very scientifically, very professionally. And in my opinion, there is a problem here because the way the activities and requirements are costed leaves much to be desired. There are many factors. It's not as if it's whimsical that you in a particular year you increase the defense budget by 25%, next year you bring it down to 2%. It's not whimsical. It depends on a lot of factors which must be taken into account.
With vast coastline and long volatile international border with China and Pakistan, our defense budget needs are based on our military doctrine. Based on the doctrinal concept for defense forces, which is in fact a two-pronged strategy, one each aimed at China and Pakistan, our defense network is accordingly stretched across the nation, operating in all kinds of weather systems that are normally seen and felt on a global scale. So our defense budget has to cater to all this and more for future exigencies. Hence, drafting a defense budget has always been a tricky assignment as well as a challenging one for the finance minister. The outgoing UPA government had presented an interim budget earlier this year. The reality is, the figures that have been presented on the floor of the parliament is valid for the whole of 2014-15 fiscal year, not just for 3 or 4 months. At 2,24,000 crores, which roughly translates into 37.33 billion US dollars, or just about 12.70% of the total central government expenditure, this, the experts say, is as good as it gets. But is it good enough for the future perfect? Nonetheless, this allocation is not what the Ministry of Defence had asked for. The point to recall and remember is that for the third year in running, allocation is less than 2% of the gross domestic product, or what is known as the GDP. Is it the right way to compare defense budget with that of what percent is it of GDP? Those who had dealt with the numbers say it doesn't at all matter. This is just a matter of debate and scoring points over, stating what is inadequate or what is not. The fact of the matter of defense budget is, pay and allowances account for more than 1/3 of the total budget and a little less than 2/3 of the revenue budget. And the figure keeps on increasing with every passing year. Experts have a point of opinion on this one. They say the ever-increasing bill for pay and accounts could create some roadblocks for complete deployment of new mountain strike force for Arunachal Pradesh. This strike force has been raised and is in its initial stage of deployment. Any budget cuts in this area could blunt our deterrence along the Indochina's line of actual control. We take a short break, and when we come back, we'll see what are the expectations of the defense experts from the present government. Welcome back after the break. You are watching half an hour special program on issues before India's defense budget. One by one, we take a closer look at the budgetary needs of all the three services, namely the Army, Navy and the Air Force. On an average, Army consumes anything between 48% and 50% of the total budget, which is proportionate to its size. There is always a lurking fear in the army for another round of cutbacks in funds for critical areas such as ammunition and spares, since expenditure on rations, petrol and clothing cannot be curtailed. There is nothing new in this. It has happened in the past. And such a situation directly affects the war-waging capacity of the armed forces, both at the attack level platforms as well as the defensive ones.
बट जो मैटर्स ऑफ नेशनल सॉवरेंटी है उनमें हमें सख्ती से पेश आना चाहिए। जहाँ पे नेशनल प्राइड की बात आती है वहाँ हमें सख्ती से पेश आना चाहिए ताकि दुनिया के नज़र में हिंदुस्तान का जो चित्र है वो ख़राब ना हो। यही असली बात है। तो ये कैसे हो सकता है? एक तो हमें इस तरह की क्षमता हो जिससे हम लोगों के साथ मुकाबला कर सकें, दुश्मनों के साथ मुकाबला कर सकें, जिसको हम कॉम्बैट पावर कहते हैं। तो उसके लिए हमें कुछ बजट चाहिए जो कॉम्बैट पावर का बढ़ावा करे, स्ट्राइक कोर बन जाए, एयरक्राफ्ट कैरियर हो जाए, फाइटर एयरक्राफ्ट आ जाए। इन सब चीज़ों से हमारे देश की कॉम्बैट पावर बढ़ती है। एक दूसरी क्षमता है जिससे हमारी इज्जत बढ़ती है, जिससे हमारी मतलब वर्ल्ड के अंदर एक ऐसा स्टैंडिंग बनता है एज ए रिस्पॉन्सिबल पावर। तो उसमें भी एक कंपोनेंट जिसको हम कहते हैं बिनाइन पावर, सॉफ्ट पावर के हिसाब से। तो एक तरफ तो हमारा कॉम्बैट पावर बढ़ना चाहिए, दूसरी तरफ हमारे बिनाइन पावर भी बढ़ने चाहिए, जिसका मतलब ये है कि हम उन क्षेत्रों में जाएं जो कि सामूहिक रूप से सबके भले के लिए हो। मतलब एज ए सोसाइटी, एज ए इंटरनेशनल कम्युनिटी हम उन एक्टिविटीज़ में पार्टिसिपेट करें थ्रू आवर आर्म्ड फोर्सेस, विच इज़ गुड फॉर द एंटायर रीजन।
The revised estimate of 2013-14 for stores budget head of the Indian Army was rupees 1,908 crores, more than the actual expenditure for 2012 and 13. The allocation for 2014-15 is mere 480 crores, more than the revised estimate of 2013-14.
Everyone asks for additional allocation, but the fact of the matter is that trend indicates every year the defense budget out of capital allocation 10% have been being surrendered, which is a huge amount, and utilization has not been planned.
The cascading effect of inadequacy of funds is evident from the category allocation for the ex-servicemen's contributory health scheme. One wonders why ever in first place outlay of this particular scheme is in the defense budget. It should be part of Health Ministry's proposed Universal Health Insurance Scheme. According to the interim budget of the defense, the allocation for this scheme for 2014-15 is rupees 354 crores less than the revised estimate. And there comes into the picture of raging controversy surrounding one rank, one pension scheme. Decision to implement has been taken, but process yet to be completed. The problem lies in recategorization of other ranks, which are only 3 these days as compared to 8 in the earlier days. The surviving ex-servicemen from earliest days of formation of army need to be adjusted according to the categories available today. Finance Minister needs to take a firm view on this.
The army as on date, the important figure is army as on date lacks about 80,000 crores. The planning figure for next 10 years is about 80,000 crores of armored fighting vehicles, oblique tanks, artillery guns of about 50 to 60,000 this thing, and infantry weapon systems and all about 20,000 crores.
There is no denying of the fact that Defence Ministry's revenue budget is under tremendous strain. Though the extent of this strain would be different for different services and departments. Take for example, the Indian Air Force.
The revenue budget is very tightly controlled and it increases at a very gradual pace, and it is impacting Air Force now. The lack of money in the capital for revenue, because the new equipment which has been inducted requires maintenance. The Sukhoi 30, for example, uses much more ATF than the single engine aircraft of yesteryears. So the ATF bill has been steadily going up, and under revenue you got to pay your salaries, which is a statutory requirement, but ATF is required to make aircraft fly, and the balance money is available to you to do everything else, which is buying spares, using consumables, training, travel, and that gets squeezed.
Then there is another tricky area to negotiate in defence budget planning. The funds for what is known as committed liabilities for schemes and contracts that are in the pipeline or have been committed. These committed liabilities are believed to account for approximately 95% of the capital acquisition budget for the year 2013-14.
Let's talk about the capital budget, and in particular about the capital acquisition budget. For one thing, you can't have pre-decided proportions, because in a given year, suppose for example this year MMRCA is to go through, Air Force will obviously need much more money than Navy or Army. Maybe next year some other service requires a huge amount of money because some big ticket item is likely to go through. So it varies from year to year. And so this is one. The other is the limited pie that you have. So when you distribute the allocation, you keep in mind the requirement of various services.
Using this as the standard, hardly rupees 3,780 crores will be available for new schemes in the year 2014-15. Since only an advance payment of 15% is generally made in the year in which a new contract is signed, this amount will be sufficient for new schemes amounting to mere rupees 25,000 crores. Obviously, therefore, the 2014-15 capital acquisition budget does not cater for projects such as buying Rafale fighter jets from France. If the deal goes through, then Finance Minister has to set aside at least 10,000 crores till March 31st, 2015 to make sure that Indian Air Force gets what it wants, at least in case of Rafale. Another area of neglect is Indian Navy's lack of complete domination of our country's vast coastline. There are visible gaps along the coast that needs to be sealed so that no terrorist infiltration takes place via the sea route. Tracing back the budgetary allocation of the defense budgets since the early 50s, just imagine, only 193 crores were given to the armed forces in the year 1951-52. However, in those days the value of money was obviously higher as compared to the present times. In 1961-62, it was 315 crores, and in the year 71-72, soon after Indo-Pak War and the days of splendid military leadership during Sam Manekshaw days, the military budget was 1,241 crore rupees. Then in the year 1981-82, it was 4,200 crores and it went up to 16,350 crore rupees in the year 1991-92. Then came the 21st century, where in the year 2001 and 2, the defense budget shot up to rupees 62,000 crores, and in the year 2011 and 12, it was doubled at 1,64,415 crore rupees.
I have never ever come across any empirical study which establishes that providing 3% of the GDP to defense would meet all the requirements, and everybody is going to live happily thereafter. But it's not to say that there is you can't have an ideal budget, but that ideal budget is, as I said earlier, when you are able to first of all plan your activities according to the likelihood of the money that you will get, and then cost your annual requirements in a more professional manner. And if these two things are done, then whatever you work out is the ideal budget, if you get it.
Most important thing is to put the economy back on rail, because if the economy prospers, everyone shares that happiness. And if the economy grows as it was growing earlier, then I'm sure the allocations will go on increasing. And in absolute terms, I wouldn't like to put a figure, because this is something which is very involved, where you have to add all the requirements to see how much you want, and it is something which only people who are involved with the process will be able to do. But what I'd like to recommend, that adequate money be made available for modernization, and adequate thought be given to keep the revenue expenditure growing in tandem with what you are acquiring.
And the current interim budget, as we know, stands at rupees 2,24,000 crores. All eyes are now on July the 10th, the actual budget day for this fiscal year 2014-15. This has been a special program on issues before this year's defense budget. This is Vineet, Dikshit signing off for the day till we meet again. Keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.